First, we are very happy to have Peter Vanderminden here, and he is Principal Analyst of IoT at Flatiron Strategies. He's also very recently been named Executive in Residence at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI. He's a former Microsoft executive, and he's going to attack the very important topic of how do we handle all this data? There are big implications about security and privacy and surveillance and transparency. And I think in the course of our normal days, we can sometimes forget sort of that larger issue of what's going on. So please welcome all of you again to the show, and please welcome Peter Vanderminden, who's going to set us straight on how we should be handling all of this data.
Good luck. Thank you, Roger. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the conference. This is actually going to be my fourth time presenting at the conference. I'm very pleased and excited to be here. And I wanted to talk about, as Roger mentioned, a session here on, as I called, Are You Seeing Dots? And what I mean by that, actually, is let's have a conversation about data ownership and transparent surveillance. And if you think about it, it's actually more about actually being explicit about data ownership and transparent surveillance, and is what I call EDOTS as an acronym. And let's first of all step back and think about, okay, what is a brief history of internet time? And I would ask you to think about, can you identify the computer below? Anybody see any computers there? Okay. Well, in fact, toilets can make decisions. Okay. You go up to and you press the lever and you tell it to start flushing. And it then flushes, and then it senses that its tank is empty and it should stop flushing. And it then furthermore senses that its tank is empty and I should fill back up. And then it yet again executes a third decision. It recognizes that the tank is full and should stop filling. And if you think about it, a toilet is stateful. It knows what state it's in. It has memory and understands history of what its prior state, whereas a piano is stateless. Yes, a piano is interesting. It's the invention of the keyboard, but a toilet is really actually an analog computer. And if you think about it, as engineers and computer scientists and programmers, we're actually just building more evolved toilets. And at the end of the day, the formal definition of automation is replacing people with machines in tasks requiring decisions. And in fact, that is what a toilet does. And this is what we're often doing with our computers, the cloud, big data, IoT, and such. So let's think about, do you know what was the first RFID device? Okay? And this is actually the progenitor of RFID. Back in 1945, the Russian scientist Vanderminden created a passive radio frequency device that you could aim a radio signal at it, and that would power it and allow it to capture the audio in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and it would then subsequently broadcast back the audio feed that the microphone was capturing. And this stayed spying on the U.S. ambassador for a total of 7 years before the U.S. finally found it. And it took them close to a year to actually figure out the technology underneath it and how it actually worked, because it didn't have any power source. It was literally being powered passively through an RF signal being broadcast to it, and it could then reply back. And so it's surveillance at the end of the day. It's the start of it. So I'd ask you to also think about, what was the decade that you first played a multiplayer software as a service game over the internet, okay? First time I did this was in 1979, okay? Played Zork. My wife worked for GE Aerospace up in Syracuse, New York. She would bring home this teletype acoustic coupled device. We would log in, dial up and log into a VAX computer, and from there we would type in a TCP IP address and hop down to a VAX at the Pentagon, and we would play Zork, or some people may know it as Dungeon, okay? This technology has actually been around for a while. And let's think about now a definition of IoT. Everybody's offering up, what is IoT? Everybody's asking, what is that? And I'd ask you to step back and think about, Norbert Wiener and his book Cybernetics, about control and communication in the animal and the machine. And the critical thing that he really recognized back in 1948 when he published this book is that future development was really going to be about how we develop communication facilities to transmit messages between man and machine, between machine and man, and between machine and machine. Okay? And he used this to actually create the first computerized servo mechanism to aim anti-aircraft guns during World War II, because they needed a way to predict where the plane would be by the time the bullets reached it. And so they actually had to shoot in front of the plane, and they were getting data from radar, and they actually needed to come up with a way to do it. And so we have really the real roots of what we are thinking about, of computerized control systems in our factories and IoT devices, all coming from this. And so let's think about now, where can IoT go? And one of my favorite quotes is by William Ford Gibson: "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." And so you see what I just went through is we've had a lot of these ideas. They've been around, but it's taken a while for them to permeate and for us to figure out how to use them and bring them into our everyday lives. And so you probably have seen charts like this. It's the Internet of everything. It's not just IoT. It's tablets, it's smartphones, PCs, connected cars, wearables. And supposedly we're like at about 15 billion connected devices today. By 2020, we're supposed to be up around 25, 30 billion. And it's projected that by about 2020, we will be up to over 200 billion connected devices. This is what Gartner and IDC and Forrester are all basically indicating. And I recently stepped back and said, okay, let me take an inventory of my own personal life. How many IoT devices do I have? And I'm sure there's probably some people here in the audience who've got more than this. Often when I'm talking at conferences, it's more like a number like around 8 or 10. But really step back and think about all of the devices that you have that are connected. And you may think, okay, I'll go look at, what's on my router, how many devices do I hang off of it? And you'll notice I've got 3 highlighted here: Cable Box, Kindle Tablet, Smart Vehicle, Easy Pass. Those are all connected devices that don't hang off of your router in your home. They actually have their own private networks that they are going out and connecting. So the idea that, I can understand what sort of surveillance is happening in my own personal life by going and securing my own home network. No, there are other types of networks that are intruding, and this may well happen in your organizations, where someone brings in, a supplier may bring in a device that they've already connected up, and it doesn't need to go on your corporate network for it to report back. So we're also used to thinking about like an IoT device taxonomy in large, mobile, small, micro, and probably a bunch of you are playing around with Raspberry Pi and Arduino devices and thinking that's where we're going with IoT. We should try to be prototyping things like that. The challenge with that is that if we're focused on building devices at this scale, we'll never get to over 200 IoT devices by 2020. The economics of it just doesn't work. People can only buy so many $150 smart light bulbs. And I think that where we really should be looking and focusing our efforts is what I call disposable IoT. And this is stepping back and taking a further look at RFID and going to next-gen RFID and thinking about how do we have an RFID device that's still passive but maybe could be powered by other means, vibration, can use non-volatile memory so it's secure, use FPGA chips, incorporate I2C bus, talk to sensors, and actually bring the price down well under $10, well under maybe even $3, and maybe even below $1. We can do that, and when we get to disposable IoT, that's when we're really going to see the real explosion happen. And so I'd ask you to think about, you know, what, say, a disposable IoT for a medicinal package. We're all familiar with these foil pill packs that we pop a pill out. Imagine putting a chip on that that can detect each time that you pop a pill out and lets your phone know that, oh, you just took this, and can alert you, do you have any conflicting doses, or maybe you've taken too many of this because you've taken maybe these 3 over-counter medicines that all have acetaminophen in them, and now you have an overdose. And maybe it can let your doctor know or your pharmacist know, I just took this pill, I'm sticking to the regimen. Improve your health lives. This is where we can go with this. And the ability to power this, we now are seeing in the lab things like lithium-ion batteries the size of a grain of sand that could be used to power something like that. Or let's get back to Theremin with using, in essence, ambient radiation. We have got in the lab now using ambient backscatter radiation to power devices, actually perform logic and transmit back. This type of technology over the next decade being put into IoT, we will see the explosion getting out to over 200 billion plus devices. But think about it, I've got 62 in my home right now. It's getting hard to manage. You know, getting the patch updates, making sure I've got the antivirus. It's losing connection. I got to reestablish it. Bluetooth is always annoying in that regard. We've got to get it much more stable, much more robust. And we're seeing a lot of concepts and ideas for lots of different types of interesting products with a whole lot of different use cases for us to explore, have tremendous public benefit. That we can do for consumers, for industry, a lot of potential here. But what is the current state that we're in? And I'd ask you to think about this. Okay, recently here, TrendNet was forced by the FTC to stand up and go through 20 years of auditing because they had a security flaw with their internet protocol cameras, baby monitors. CNN has a regular tracking of what they consider to be the internet's most dangerous sites. And this is not a danger as in you can get to malware. This is, a French nuclear plant has left themselves open and exposed, and you can go in and control the reactor. Okay? Anybody can get to it. And that's Shodan is a great way to track those sorts of things. Microsoft had lots of issues over their forced Windows upgrades. We've got Facebook getting banned, trying to do something around net neutrality in India. We've got the Apple Watch being banned from UK cabinet meetings due to Russian hacking fears. We've got Google in New York actually having a whole network of internet kiosks throughout New York City having to be turned off because of privacy concerns, killing a major thing that Mayor de Blasio was trying to do there. And then, of course, most recently, we've got the botnet army of about 100,000 IoT devices, again, on cameras, disrupting Dyn, okay? And this is causing a lot of concerns. We all think, yes, IoT is going to have this massive growth curve, but we're now starting to see articles coming out. The first one there is from the Telegraph in the UK, in which they reported on a study that Deloitte did, reporting that sales are flatlining, okay? And this other article here that was published just here a few days ago, talking about how Americans are actually getting discouraged from purchasing these types of technologies due to cybersecurity concerns. Everybody's getting wound up about privacy and security and, okay, is this all Big Brother? Okay, and I would ask you, are we having the right conversations with our customers in this regard? And we like to talk about, oh, we've got to have security. But I would say that we really should be talking to our customers about surveillance. That's what this technology does. You cannot have security without surveillance. You have a home security system. What is it doing? It is monitoring the perimeter of your house. It is conducting surveillance. Is there any intrusion coming in that you want to be notified about? Now, we're willing to put that system in because it protects us. But we have to be upfront and tell people this system is about surveillance, and this is how you will be more secure as a result. If we just talk about security, it's too nebulous. That's just a need. It's contextual. It will vary in every different situation. But if instead you say, let's have a conversation about surveillance, and this is the nature of the surveillance that we're going to do, now we can have a frank conversation with our customers and get them comfortable about what the technology is about. And let's think about, data ownership versus privacy. Again, we're all talking about privacy, the need for privacy. Again, it's a need. It's nebulous. It's contextual. What we really should be doing is having a conversation with our customers about the data telemetry that these surveillance systems are generating and who owns what data. What is owned by the equipment provider? What is owned by me personally? What is potentially shared across other potential partners? What's public? And it's going to vary in different situations. But if you don't have that conversation about the data ownership and you just walk in and create this IoT device and assume, oh, the company's going to own all the data. But we didn't think that the customer might want to own some of it. And so that's really what we need to think about. So let's think about how invasive surveillance can get, okay? Toto, Japanese plumbing facilities manufacturer, has a smart toilet. It will actually measure your waste deposit and will report on your urine samples, can actually send back to your doctor over a cell phone connection that is in the toilet things like your blood pressure, your heart rate, your body fat, your weight. Okay? This is on the market today. And beneficially, this could be very good. You might want to have this level of monitoring going on to improve your health, okay, and let your doctor know. On the other hand, if you happen to have attended the Conference on Human Factors and Computing Conference in Toronto back in April of 2014, and you went to go use the public restrooms, you would have found stickers on the stalls announcing that the behavior at these toilets is being recorded for analysis. Access your live data at this link, and here's a QR code you can scan with your phone, and you do it, and it pulls up a web feed that starts telling you that, toilet ID number 1 is currently has a deposit of waste of this many kilograms. The odor was either neutral or was sulfuric. Did this person have any blood alcohol? Were any drugs detected? Was the person pregnant? Okay? You could actually do this with the Toto toilet if it was installed in a public restroom. Okay? Now, in fact, this was a hackathon, and they did this as a hoax, but just to start the conversation about, oops, lost the slide here? Okay. Okay? Thank you. So, it was a hoax, but let's just start to have the conversation about what is privacy in a public restroom. And actually, Intel did a study, and they found that 70% of people were willing to allow this in public restrooms if it provided a public benefit. Could we better track, a contagion? This could be interesting. We could really improve public health benefit. But what if your employer put it in? And your employer could now find out maybe that you're pregnant even before you knew. Okay? This is really pretty interesting space for us to go into. And now let's think about Tesla. They're a really cool company. Okay? They just this past May announced that for the last 2 years, all of their vehicles coming off of the production line have about 15 sensors in them, and they have been monitoring the driving habits of all of their customers. They are collecting data at a rate of 1 million driven miles per every 10 hours. They have built out a massive data set of over 780 million driven miles over the last 2 years. Now, on one hand, this is incredible. If we wanted to have a big data set so that we can go analyze it with machine learning and really develop smart algorithms so that we can have autonomous driving, we actually really need the big data to monitor how people actually drive in real-world situations. How fast did I go through this turn? How did I approach this intersection, given these other cars and pedestrians approaching? Tesla is so far ahead of Google and the traditional automotive companies, it's not silly, okay? On the other hand, though, interesting, Tesla gets a pass. If Ford or GM had done this, whoa, the privacy advocates would be all over them. How dare you monitor how I drive, okay? And furthermore, Tesla did this, and they admit they did it secretly. They didn't tell their customers they were doing it. Yeah, there was maybe something buried in the T's and C's of it, but they were pretty oblique about it, okay? And in fact, New York City Department of Transportation actually had an IoT implementation killed over something very similar. Back on the East Coast, we have something called Easy Pass. It's a toll transponder like you've got here in California. And New York City Department of Transportation came up with a wonderful idea. How do we reduce congestion in Manhattan? And if we can reduce congestion in Manhattan, we can reduce pollution. Great public benefit. They said, we've got all these cars driving around with Easy Passes. We can put up a receiver at every intersection in Manhattan and catch the ping off of the transponder. We're not going to charge a toll. We just want to know the traffic volume so that we can better coordinate the traffic lights. Great idea. However, they failed to have a conversation with the customers. They weren't transparent about the surveillance that this was happening, and they didn't think about the data ownership. They didn't need to upload the full vehicle ID of the transponder. They only needed to capture that, a ping happened. But they didn't think about the data ownership aspects. They didn't think about the surveillance aspects. And the ACLU went after them, sued, and they had to take the system down. And so that's how we think about the challenges we're facing relative to surveillance. Let's now think about are we losing control over ownership? And if you're in the agricultural field, there's a major debate going on right now with, do you own your tractor? Farmers have always been used to owning their tractor, okay? Well, now as John Deere is IoT enabling the tractors, the farmers are getting all upset about this. And it's John Deere is trying to impose the data rights management technology as a way to impose this ownership and telling farmers that they can't mess with the tractors and the data telemetry that it's gathering and collecting. And we stop and think about who actually owns farmers' big data. Is it Monsanto? Is it, because maybe John Deere is going to go and sell the data telemetry that they got. Okay, so many seeds were put down, so much fertilizer, so much pesticide was put down. The farmers need to know this, but on the other hand, if you're like one of these big agricultural companies, does John Deere maybe know the progress of what you're planting and what your productivity yield is? Okay, who actually owns this? And in a similar manner, Michelin has actually come out with an IoT-enabled tire that they are selling to the mining industry. And you don't buy a tire anymore. You buy tire as a service, and you pay tons per kilometer. Okay? Now, if you're Rio Tinto and you've outfitted all of the mining equipment across, these 30 iron mines, these 20 bauxite mines, okay, Michelin actually has perhaps better real-time information on the mining activities happening there. Should this data belong to Michelin? Okay, that's Rio Tinto's data. Maybe it goes up into Michelin's cloud and it's made accessible, but would Michelin have go back to Rio Tinto and say, you've got to pay to access your data? Okay. Or how is Michelin securing the data? And now I don't mean to pick on Michelin or John Deere. I don't know how they're actually managing this, just to be clear, okay? But I hope they're having the conversation with their customers about these aspects, because the question is who actually does own this data? Can Michelin go and sell it to another mining company? Does Michelin have maybe a rogue employee that is going and placing options contracts at the commodities exchange because they know, the production yield that's happening? We really have to have very frank conversations around this if we're to understand what we need to secure and who owns what. Here's another interesting one. This is more on the consumer side of things. Think about when you stand up the services in support of your IoT device, or maybe it's just an application you've got on a phone, and think about the data and how you manage the account with your customers, particularly as they move across borders. Starting to see articles like these and quotes like these where, in this case, there was one individual who moved from New Zealand to Holland, and he was basically a graphics artist, page layout artist for a magazine, and he had built up a massive library of all of his fonts and various layout templates he had created, and he all had it stored up in Adobe's Creative Cloud. And he moves to Netherlands, and he says to Adobe, I'd like to move my account, okay? Adobe had no way of doing this. They literally told him, you have to close your account in New Zealand and open a new one in Holland. And oh, by the way, you're going to lose all of your past projects that you had created and stored. We're going to delete them, and we won't transfer them. Okay? Now, he also ran into problems with Microsoft, with Google, with Amazon. So this is rampant. We're all making this big mistake. Oh, Apple, he had major issues with Apple as well. But the only ones that worked well for him were MailChimp and Netflix. Those were the only ones that he was able to transfer easily. Okay? That's a major screw-up, folks, that we can't do this. So how do we dig ourselves out of this hole? Okay? And I think it's all about developing what I call an EDOTS strategy. And we're probably used to seeing, you've probably seen a lot of technology vendors, give some sort of an architectural diagram like this. Okay, we're going to have some various IoT devices, and they're going to generate data that we're going to capture and monitor real-time performance, and we're going to send this up to the cloud so that we can do machine learning algorithms on it, and then we're going to loop back so that we can optimize the equipment and the performance of the device. And many companies say this is the whole concept of an IoT. We've just defined it right here. And if they're a little bit more forward-thinking, they may have also said, well, there's other things we can do with this data, okay? We can basically say, let's give this data to our design and engineering department so we can do better design optimization of our product. Let's actually supply the data to our upstream component suppliers and partner manufacturers so we can do better supply chain collaboration. Maybe we should also share some some of this data with our downstream distributors and dealers so that we can stand up new service capabilities and do better resource optimization in our downstream supply chain. Great, but we're not done yet. What's missing here is we've got all the people that are using these devices, either as individuals, as consumers, or maybe as a part of an organization. And you need to have a local fog cloud locally that is giving those users, those organizations, control over the surveillance that is actually happening and control over the data ownership, and thus determine what is actually going to go back upstream. Okay? You don't have a complete diagram until you've brought that in. So, I'd ask you to think about, does the IoT enablement solve your needs or the customer's needs? I see a lot of companies, they go and they have a product, and they say, well, let's go IoT enable it. We're going to add these new features. And they typically take an approach that I call inside out. The company says, we'll add these IoT capabilities because this data telemetry will be beneficial for us to better manage the product at the customer's site. It's all about us. And what they're missing is failing to take into account what's the client's view of this innovation. In essence, the outside looking in view. And if all you do is focus on what's relevant for your organization and not develop in parallel something that's going to benefit the customer, they're not going to buy into that surveillance. Okay? And so here's a recent chart that I came across. It was a study that was done by Forrester Consulting that was taking a look at, with supply chain managers, how IoT solutions could enhance supply chain visibility, asset tracking, and locational issues. And you look down this list, and it's maybe a bit hard to read, but in essence, there are only 3 that actually address needs of customers. Okay? So 80% of it is inside out. That's upside down. Customers will reject what you're bringing to them if you approach it that way. Yes, you want to have those capabilities from the IoT device, but if you don't have an equal balance of providing benefit to the customer, what do they get out of it? What data do they own? They will likely reject what you're trying to do. Okay? And so we need to flip this around. Users do need to own and fully control their data and agree to when and how they will be under surveillance. It is about control over surveillance and data access. It is about knowledge of what data is stored and how the data is stored, what service provider, how long, which jurisdiction, where does the provider operate, what laws apply. Do you have agreement to capture this data? Okay, and then freedom to choose a platform, the ability to extract the data without vendor lock-in. Okay, I have an Arlo internet camera from Netgear, and it stores the videos from the surveillance cameras up in their cloud. Why don't you give me a pointer that allows me to store it up in Dropbox or up in OneDrive? It doesn't have to be tied into just your cloud, okay? And so think about this for any product that you might create. How are you going to go about defining data telemetry in the ownership spectrum? And a good way to think about this is think about a car, okay? Now, there's going to be vehicle telematics that the Ford or Toyota, the OEM, wants to have on the vehicle. This is private to the OEM and perhaps their component suppliers. This is, how we're going to manage the pollution control devices and the fuel economy on the performance of the engine, okay? Now, this can go horribly wrong when you're a company like VW and you start messing with the software in violation of laws and regulations. But that's a very instructive example of something that this should belong to the OEM, okay? But they need to behave themselves about that, okay? Then you also have the engine diagnostic codes, okay? And here it's shared between the OEM, service partners, and in fact the vehicle owner. Is the vehicle leased or owned? If it's leased, the vehicle manufacturer has perhaps a right to say you can only bring this to our authorized dealer for maintenance and repair on the vehicle. But if you own the vehicle outright and it's out of warranty, we're all used to being able to take it to whatever garage we want. You don't want to hear from your auto mechanic, hey, BMW won't give me their diagnostic codes, I can't repair it, okay? And I've had that happen to me, okay? That's an example of where there isn't proper sharing of the data so that the vehicle can be owned in the way that I want and maintained in the way that I want to, okay? Think about the odometer. That's public. It's shared, it's regulated, okay? Nobody can touch it. You don't want the mechanics, they can get in trouble if they try to reset the odometer. But there's an example of a data element on a car that's actually very public, okay? Think about aftermarket. Think about, oh, I've got the insurance dongle from Progressive I'm going to plug in. Oh, my phone connects via Bluetooth and will put my phone directory up on the dash so I can dial out or maybe receive a call. These are aftermarket things that we want to integrate, and some of them may be shared between an OEM and a third-party provider, some designated partner, or the owner may want to do that, okay? The car manufacturer shouldn't be telling you, oh, you can only bring and integrate an iPhone. I should be able to do whatever phone I want to interface with the vehicle. But does that mean that the data from that device all of a sudden could get transmitted back up to Toyota or Ford? And then you also think about just the infotainment and the GPS. You have a GPS on board, you put in the address you want to drive to, okay? Again, you don't want that data going back to Ford or Toyota or GM. That's private information. And when you sell the car, you want to be able to delete the information. So I would tell you that anytime you create an IoT-enabled product that you're bringing to a customer, or maybe you're doing it to build it and engineer it for a customer, you need to think about what is this spectrum. In all likelihood, you will have at least half, if not two-thirds, of these different types of scenarios. And you need to have this explicit conversation with them and their end customers so that there's agreement about who owns what and who has control over what, and give people the ability to give good controls over it. And so now how do we think about, reclaiming trust in IoT? Okay? So this is about examples of what I call EDOTs in action, okay? LinkedIn, it's great. They tell you very clearly up front, you own all of the content that you put up there, okay? But you grant them a non-exclusive license to use it, okay? But at the end of the day, they're very clear that you own it. And in fact, you can actually go to LinkedIn and say, I want my data archive. Prepare it and put it up at a site so I can download it. Think of how many other companies you engage with that offer such a neat, clean facility to get your data, okay? I think that's tremendous, and that's one of the reasons that I think LinkedIn has become so popular and so pervasive, okay? And now, here's another interesting one, okay? And we have this one headline here, Desperate Tactics. Microsoft will pay you to use its browser, okay? Well, I think they've got it a bit wrong. They've got it upside down. Now, we're used to Google. Great. We understand that surveillance, they're tracking us. We get ads all as a consequence of that, okay? And yes, maybe Microsoft is saying, okay, they'll pay you to use the browser as a way to get you exposed to it. But you get rewards out of this. So in essence, Microsoft is stepping back and saying, hey, wait a minute. The surveillance we're conducting of how you search and how we are going to go generate income selling ads is actually, you are a participant in it. You are a co-owner of the data. And so we should pay you for your participation, okay? Maybe I should get a discount on a Tesla vehicle for agreeing to let them monitor how I drive. Okay? I think this offers a very good paradigm for us to think about how you can have that conversation with the customer to say, okay, we're going to do this surveillance. You will, in fact, own this data. In fact, we're going to put together an economic model where we will pay you for some sort of value. Doesn't have to be much. It can be very minor, like it is with Bing Rewards, Microsoft Rewards. But it gets you past that whole point of the trust issues, Big Brother. They feel like, oh, we're now partners. We actually have a basis for doing business together. And here's another one that I thought was pretty good. Jawbone, after the last major earthquake that was out here, I think about 2 years ago, all their sleep trackers all of a sudden showed a spike of when people woke up. Now, here's a company that's going out trying to establish some public benefit. Here's how we can use this data. This is useful information. And they're also being very clear that they anonymize the data. They're showing an aggregate. They're very clear and transparent about it. It's a good example of how they're doing outreach to customers to keep them feeling comfortable about the monitoring that these types of technologies provide. And at the end of the day, regulators are watching. You know, the FTC is now starting to take a very close look at this. Companies are actually starting to get fined. They may have to sign up for like 20-year audits around this, and being very clear that we have to give users options to limit data collection. You really do need to be explicit here about the data, data ownership, and be transparent about the surveillance. You do need an EDOTS strategy. So with that, thank you. And one last thing, I will be speaking on Thursday on a session called IoT, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll be going through a rogues gallery of where these have really gone wrong.